McLaren did not just leave Canada with a bad result. They left Canada with a problem that could split the garage in two. Because when both cars get caught in the same strategic mess, when the drivers know there was more on the table, and when a team fighting at the front suddenly looks confused under pressure, the damage is not only measured in points. It is measured in trust. And that is why this Canadian Grand Prix may become much bigger than one lost opportunity. McLaren had speed. They had two drivers capable of hurting the teams around them. They had a chance to walk away looking like a real championship-level operation. Instead, one brutal question followed them out of Montreal. How does a team this fast end up making itself look so vulnerable? That is where the tension begins. Because in Formula 1, a slow car is a problem. A confused pit wall is a crisis. And when strategy costs both sides of the garage, nobody inside that team forgets it quickly. Not Lando Norris. Not Oscar Piastri. And definitely not the people who now have to explain how McLaren turned potential into frustration, confidence into doubt, and a race full of opportunity into a double disaster. Subscribe to the channel. Canada was supposed to make McLaren look dangerous. Not perfect. Not untouchable. Not suddenly above every weakness that has followed the team through its rise back to the front. But dangerous. The kind of dangerous that makes rivals check their mirrors earlier than usual. The kind of dangerous that makes a pit wall think twice before committing to a plan. The kind of dangerous that turns a race weekend into a warning, because even if McLaren does not win, they are close enough to hurt anyone who makes a mistake. And that is exactly why what happened in Canada felt so damaging. Because the problem was not that McLaren had no pace. The problem was not that the drivers looked lost. The problem was not that the team arrived with nothing to fight for. The problem was the opposite. McLaren had enough to make the day matter. They had enough to put pressure on the teams around them. They had enough to create a serious race. They had enough to leave Montreal with momentum, belief, and a stronger grip on their place near the front. And instead, the conversation became about strategy. That is the word no top team wants hanging over its garage after a Grand Prix. Strategy. Because strategy is supposed to be the invisible strength. When it works, people talk about the driver, the pace, the bravery, the result. When it fails, everyone suddenly sees the pit wall. Every delay looks bigger. Every radio message sounds heavier. Every lap left too long, every missed window, every moment of hesitation becomes part of the story. And once that happens, the team cannot hide. That is what makes this so uncomfortable for McLaren. They are no longer the hopeful underdog that gets praised for simply being close. They are not in the phase where a decent points finish is enough to calm everyone down. McLaren has changed its own standard. The car is too competitive, the drivers are too strong, and the expectation is too high. That is the price of progress. When a team climbs back toward the front, the applause gets louder at first. People call it a revival. They celebrate the improvement. They talk about the journey, the rebuild, the patience, the belief. But then something changes. At some point, being close stops feeling impressive. It starts feeling unfinished. And Canada was one of those weekends where unfinished was not good enough. Because this was not just about one driver being upset. It was not just about one side of the garage wondering what might have been. The disaster felt bigger because both cars were pulled into the same strategic shadow. And when both cars are affected, the questions become sharper. Was this bad luck or bad control? Was it a difficult race or a race McLaren made more difficult for itself? Was the team reacting to events instead of shaping them? Those questions matter, because Formula 1 at the front is not a place for slow thinking. The decisions come fast. Sometimes brutally fast. A driver can spend 20 laps building a race, saving the tires, managing the gap, waiting for the right moment, and then lose everything because the pit wall hesitates for just one lap. One lap sounds tiny. But in Formula 1, one lap can be the difference between clean air and traffic. Between attacking and defending. Between being the hunter and becoming the target. Think of it like a doorway in a crowded room. For 1 second, the path is open. You can move through cleanly. But if you wait, the crowd shifts, the door blocks, and suddenly you are not choosing your path anymore. You are trapped in someone else's movement. That is what strategy windows feel like. They open quietly. Then they close without mercy. And in Canada, McLaren looked like a team that did not get through the door cleanly. That is where the tension begins. Because Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are not slow drivers waiting to be rescued by strategy. They are drivers who can create results if the team gives them the right platform. Norris brings emotion, experience with McLaren, and the weight of being the driver who stayed through the difficult years. Piastri brings a colder kind of threat, a calmness that makes his frustration feel even more serious when it appears. Together, they give McLaren one of the strongest driver pairings on the grid. But that strength creates a problem. Two fast drivers do not make strategy easier. They make it harder. Because every decision is doubled. Every pit stop affects not only one race, but the balance between two teammates. Every call is judged by both sides. Every missed chance feels personal, even when it is not meant to be. And when the team gets it wrong for both cars, there is nowhere to hide. Nobody can say it was only one unlucky call. Nobody can pretend it was only one driver's race falling apart. The whole operation comes under the spotlight. And this is the part McLaren should fear most. Drivers can forgive many things. They can forgive a car that is slightly slower than expected. They can forgive a rival having a better day. They can even forgive bad luck, because every driver knows racing can be cruel. But avoidable mistakes are different. Avoidable mistakes stay in the mind. They get replayed in the debrief. They get questioned in private. They return the next time the team gives an instruction over the radio. And the driver starts wondering, do they really see what I see out here? That question is dangerous. Because the relationship between a driver and a pit wall is built on instant trust. When the team says box, the driver must believe. When the team says stay out, the driver must commit. When the team says push now, the driver has to spend tire life, battery, and risk without knowing the full picture. He has to trust that the people behind the screens understand the race better than he does from inside the car. But when Canada happens, that trust gets tested. Not destroyed in one moment. Tested. And sometimes, that is even more dangerous, because a broken relationship is obvious. A tested one can look normal from the outside while changing quietly inside. That is why this story is bigger than a bad Sunday. McLaren's rise has been built on belief. Belief from the drivers. Belief from the factory. Belief from fans who watch the team struggle, rebuild, and return with real purpose. But belief has to be protected. It cannot survive forever on speed alone. A fast car gives a team opportunity. Clear decisions turn opportunity into results. And Canada exposed the gap between those two things. Because if McLaren wants to be treated like a championship-level team, it has to operate like one when the race gets messy. Not only when the plan is simple. Not only when the tires behave perfectly. Not only when the pit window appears exactly where the simulation predicted. The real test comes when the race starts changing shape. When another team makes an early move. When traffic appears in the wrong place. When the tire drop-off arrives sooner than expected. When both drivers need protection at the same time. That is when a team shows what it truly is. And in Canada, McLaren did not leave people talking about control. They left people talking about confusion. That is a brutal difference. Because confusion does not just cost points. It changes how rivals see you. If rivals believe your pit wall can be pressured, they will pressure it. If they believe you are slow to choose, they will force you into choices. If they believe you are afraid to prioritize, they will turn your fairness into a weakness. Formula One teams do not need you to collapse completely. They only need you to hesitate. And once they see that hesitation, they remember it. That is why the Canadian Grand Prix could become a reference point for every team watching McLaren. Not because McLaren suddenly became slow. Not because Norris and Piastri suddenly became less dangerous. But because speed without sharp execution leaves the door open. And rivals at the front do not need the door wide open. They only need a crack. For McLaren, the most painful part is that the drivers know this too. Norris knows what missed chances feel like. He has been part of McLaren's long climb, and he understands how rare real opportunities can be. When a competitive weekend slips away, it is not just frustration. It is history repeating in a new form. Piastri knows something different. He knows that his career is moving quickly. He knows that every season shapes how the paddock sees him. He knows that if he is going to become the driver many people believe he can become, he cannot afford to watch results disappear through decisions outside his hands. That creates internal pressure. Not the loud kind. Not the dramatic kind that always turns into headlines immediately. The quiet kind. The kind that builds in strategy rooms, private conversations, and small radio exchanges. The kind where a driver starts asking sharper questions. Where an engineer has to explain more. Where the team has to prove, not just promise, that the same mistake will not happen again. And that is why Canada may matter long after the points are counted. Because a double disaster does not only damage the championship picture. It damages the feeling inside the garage. It makes everyone a little more alert. A little more defensive. A little less willing to accept a vague answer. And for a team with two ambitious drivers, that can become explosive. McLaren has to manage more than tires and pit windows now. It has to manage trust. It has to manage perception. It has to manage the uncomfortable truth that when both cars are caught in a strategy failure, both drivers walk away with reasons to question what happened. And the hardest part is that neither Norris nor Piastri needs to say much for the tension to be real. Sometimes the most revealing moments in Formula One are not the loud arguments. They are the careful words, the controlled answers, the way a driver avoids saying too much because saying the full truth would create a bigger problem. That is where McLaren now finds itself. A fast team under a brighter spotlight, with two drivers who expect more than excuses. And Canada did not answer whether McLaren is ready for that level. It raised the question. Because if a team wants to fight at the front, the car cannot be the only thing that improves. The decisions have to improve. The communication has to improve. The confidence has to improve. The timing has to improve. Otherwise, every race becomes a threat. Every opportunity becomes fragile. Every strategic window becomes a test of whether McLaren has truly become a winning machine, or whether it is still learning how to behave like one. And after Canada, that question is no longer quiet. The danger for McLaren is that Canada did not look like a mystery from the outside. It looked like a warning. Because sometimes a Formula One team can explain away a poor result with one clean sentence. The tires went away. The safety car came at the wrong time. The car did not have the pace. The weather changed. The traffic ruined the plan. Those explanations are painful, but they are simple. Canada was not simple. Canada looked like one of those races where the answers kept moving. Where every time McLaren needed a clear decision, the race created another complication. And when that happens, the strongest teams do not freeze. They simplify the chaos faster than everyone else. That is the difference. Not speed. Not ambition. Not even driver talent. The real difference at the front is how quickly a team turns confusion into action. And this is where McLaren looked exposed. Because when a race starts slipping away, it rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with a warning label. It begins as a small doubt. A lap time that drops more than expected. A rival who stops earlier than predicted. A tire that feels fine, until suddenly it does not. A driver asking if Plan A is still alive, while the pit wall is already thinking about Plan B, Plan C, and damage limitation. That is when leadership matters. And for McLaren, the uncomfortable question after Canada was whether the team led the race, or whether the race led the team. There is a massive difference between those two things. When you lead the race strategically, you decide what others must respond to. You force the pressure onto them. You make them guess. You make them cover. You make them choose between two bad options. But when the race leads you, everything becomes defensive. You react to somebody else's move. You protect against a threat that already exists. You answer questions that should have been solved one lap earlier. And one lap earlier in Formula One is not a detail. It can be everything. That is why this situation is so frustrating for a driver. From inside the cockpit, the race feels immediate. The driver can feel the grip. He can hear the tires beginning to slide. He can sense when the car behind is close enough to become a problem. He knows when the air is dirty, when the braking zone is getting risky, when the window is disappearing. The pit wall sees the bigger picture. The driver feels the moment. A great strategy brings those two worlds together. A bad one tears them apart. And when those worlds separate, the radio becomes tense. Not always angry. Not always dramatic. But tense in a way that every serious fan can hear. The engineer gives information. The driver asks for clarity. The answer comes back careful, maybe a little too careful. And suddenly, you can feel that nobody wants to say the obvious thing out loud. The plan is not working. That is the sentence no team wants to hear during a race. Because once the plan stops working, the team has to be brave enough to abandon it. Not after the evidence becomes impossible to deny. Not when the damage is already done. Earlier. When the decision still feels uncomfortable. When there is still risk. When people inside the garage can still argue that waiting one more lap might be safer. But waiting is not always safe. Sometimes waiting is the risk. That is what Canada appeared to expose.